Hello, everyone. This is Tijen Genco, Master Certified Coach and Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. You are tuned into Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco, and I have my regular companion, Marta Regalado, here with me. Welcome, Marta. How are you?
Hi, thank you for that welcome. I am good, Tijen. How are you this
I am
morning?
good. Thank you. Lovely to see you.
Likewise.
And where are you going to take us today, Marta?
So today we are going to have a discussion about cognitive distortions. And before I even started my coaching, I had no idea what a cognitive distortion was until, I became your student and you taught me, the importance and the power of cognitive distortions. So I want to start by asking you, what is a cognitive distortion?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to give you a little bit of, I want to say that as you know, I'm a certified yoga and meditation mindfulness teacher, and I'm also certified coach. So the answer resides between those two things. If you look at the way that this is standardized and thought, it's often people will give you 10 to 12 specific things about cognitive distortions. But if you look at the Eastern studies of the mind, and I don't necessarily like the mindfulness translation term in English, because really what we're looking is to mind awareness, how mind functions. So then the cognitive distortion becomes relate to how the cognition works. And therefore, in order to speak about the cognition, we need to understand how the cognitive functions function within a human system, and when they function correctly, and when they are not functioning correctly. So then what is cognition? There is something is happening, and we recognize as a human being that's taking place. And then we have interpretive mechanisms. We are like, if I explain this as an engineer, we have an interpretive mechanisms that takes that whatever is happening as a signal, translates into our internal world and the way we make meaning, and then we respond to that, whatever we thought it was happening. And therefore, then the correct cognition is receiving whatever the event is occurring in our perceptual reality, taking that as exactly what happened and responding to it as it is. But what's the likelihood of us doing that, right? We're gonna see something, interpret, oh, they did this to me, and produce all bunch of emotions about it. So the cognitive distortion is anything gets in a way in our perception system that takes in the whatever happening in actuality, and it's getting basically lost in the translation in our perceptual reality.
Mhm.
How clear was that?
Yeah, so it's kind of, the judgment versus observation. We're judging,
Mhm.
something that happens externally, giving it our own meaning,
Correct.
I think according to our own kind of beliefs about ourselves that we want to keep supporting, and not in a way that would be helpful for us necessarily. So it's interesting how this is something, we end up doing to ourselves.
Correct, because when even when we are just born, we already have models of reality by genetics, by whomever that person was carrying us through the pregnancy. their responses to the external world already starts forming our perceptual reality, the model of our world. And let's say that even before you were born, if the person carrying you were afraid of spiders, there is going to be a likelihood of response to that. So even if you see a spider that's just walking around, gonna do nothing to you, your system is going to perceive that as a threat, not necessarily within the actuality. So then I've given you this response through the mindfulness esoteric system, because the whole then purpose of the meditation and everything becomes our awareness about how our model of the world is working, so that we can get to the chosen response, not a reactive response. So then the cognitive distortions really are part of the model of our world, how we construct our perceptual reality. And that is often not necessarily what exactly the reality is, but the distortion version of that. Think about those mirrors, right? That distorts the image.
Mhm.
You could, and easier to see that with the people with the eating disorders, right? They look at the mirror and they have a very distorted reality, and that's how it is.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's really interesting, the what you said, the way we construct like our perceptual reality, through these cognitive distortions, and it's not like we're distorting things in a very positive light. We're distorting things in a negative light, and I would assume that that has to do with, our like this our evolutionary past and our need to be looking out for threats.
Well, yes and no, right? That there are also people that maybe excessively positive thinking, that may not be
Mm.
recognizing the threat. So in the Eastern traditions, that when you teach mind awareness, mind structural awareness, I'm using my own language because, again, I don't like mindfulness, because we're looking for emptiness of the mind, right? Not
Mm.
not to
Mhm.
fill it with other things. But the idea then becomes, you do the negative interpretation, return to the neutrality. You do the positive interpretation, return to the neutrality, and make a choice out of that neutral response, both from that aspects.
Mhm.
But as you pointed out, we often have a tendency to get stuck in one of the realities
Yeah.
and in a rabbit hole.
Yes. So interesting to come back to that neutral position, even if, we're heading in the direction of like, maybe too much positive thinking, or the direction of like, all of these threats. So I am curious if you could, I know there's maybe 10 to 12 cognitive distortions. I'm not exactly sure how many, but could you walk us through the different types of cognitive distortions and just explain them a little bit for us?
Absolutely. We can, before we get there, though, I want to say that certain things impact our cognitive state. Maybe we need to talk about that. I talked
Mhm.
about the correct cognition, but there is also misconception, right? That's the distortion, misunderstandings, and so on. There is cognitive distortion can occur through verbal delusion. For example, I can tell you, oh, I had the best vacation ever. You could interpret that, oh, she went to the beach because that's your favorite thing, but I actually went to mountains for hiking.
Mhm.
So we could actually interpret based on our preferences what
Mhm.
is being said. And sleep impacts the cognition because it's a different cognitive state. In sleep, we go into different domains in reality, and that's a different perceptional reality. And what we are often dealing with is the memory recall. Because once we learn something, we then our perceptual mechanisms takes in whatever we are experiencing and looks to see if there is something similar, categorizes and puts in there. So if the first thing was incorrect, like those spider thing, anything that's going to remind the cognitive processing something similar is going to be categorized as such and produce the similar response. So that's what we're doing most of the time because
Yeah.
we're not learning constantly.
Yeah. So it sounds like there is this need to relearn.
Correct. And that's what I say to when a new client shows up that asks me how many sessions I need. And I say, it depends on how many things you need to unlearn. And so the common cognitive distortions that are generally found, people can basically go on whatever their search engine is and type the cognitive distortions that they see, all or nothing thinking. Like if I didn't get the most highest score in the exam, I failed. That's the perfectionist tendency.
Yeah.
And overgeneralization, which you can see often in the language that shows up, never or always. I am, there was this person on the talking like, I'm never going to get what I want. How true is that, right?
Yeah.
Or I always get whatever I want to get, and so on. So, yeah. And another one will be projection, fortune telling. Oh, I know it's not going to be great. I know it's going to be awful and whatever. That's the tendency you were talking about, the negative and
Yeah.
and always residing in that space. The magnitude, right? Maximizing or minimizing. Always that, anyone, everyone, you can hear it that way. Emotional reasoning could be another one. Oh, I'm feeling this way, so that's that presupposition of something. Oh, I'm feeling so bad about it. It's never gonna be like this. So there are mind reading, right? We do that quite often. Oh, yeah, I know they are thinking about this. Catastrophizing, right? Oh, it's never going to be great. So these are some common ones.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting as talk about them, it's like, yes, I can see these things happening in myself. Once, you learn about them and you're coaching, you can see them coming up, in your clients and what they're expressing. So it's something incredible. I have found incredibly useful to know of,
Yes.
as a coach and to be able to pinpoint it when it comes up.
Yes, these are almost invitation for a coach, and that's come into the way I teach this in a unique way, right? These are linguistic representations of the distortion occurring in the perceptual reality. So then the coach's ability to hear these things is an information for the coach, as that's what I said, invitation to stay present and challenge what the distortion might be in that perception for the client.
Yeah. And something that I remember when you were teaching us about cognitive distortions, this was a few years back, someone asked you the question, I think this comes into play, when you're, reflecting, you're with a client, they come up with, they're talking about something that, all or nothing thinking or catastrophizing or, whatever it might be, when you reflect back, not using the cognitive distortion language. You wouldn't say, oh, I hear a cognitive distortion in what you're saying. Could it be this cognitive distortion? But instead, you don't use that language.
Correct.
You use language, exactly. So I thought that was something really important that you pointed out. How do we reflect this back in a way that, doesn't sound
Mm-hmm.
as kind of scary or off-putting or however it might sound to people?
Correct. I found that there is the frontal cortex, right? The conscious mind,
Mhm.
and there is the lesser conscious space, not necessarily unconscious, but subconscious, some level of consciousness. And the cognitive distortions sits in the lesser conscious space.
Mhm.
And this is where then when you engage the client's frontal cortex about conscious space, oh, well, there is a cognitive distortion, they will agree with you.
Mhm.
But they cannot make that shift because you haven't gotten where the problem was.
Mm.
There is this Sufi teacher that there is a story about that, which I told about in my Sufi Pathways for Mastery class. He lost his keys,
Mhm.
and then he was searching for the keys. And there was a street light in the night, and he was searching his keys under the light and then getting frustrated. And his neighbor says, Hoca Nasreddin, what is happening? And he said, I lost my keys. And he said, did you lose them here? He said, no. And then he says, then why are you looking at them here? And he says, because there is a light here. So there is a logic, right? So the coach's inability to challenge the thought, but rather say, this is what I hear, right? That traditionally how this is taught, even that's when I learned this was taught that way. And that's why I developed my own methodology, how to teach and how to inquire. When you say to somebody like, oh, well, I hear there's a fear here, and they're going to say, yeah, I agree with you, but can you change the fear? Well, no. So, yeah, that's why I don't use that distortion or technical language, but I
Yes.
reflect on what I'm hearing. That there
Mhm.
was one thing that I didn't, I think when I was giving the list, I didn't add that there shoulds and have tos. That's all.
Yes.
I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, I gotta go. And I say, oh, well, what happens if you don't go? And they're like, oh, yeah, I actually have some more time, right? So then you start to get into challenging the nervous recognition of the nervous system, reactive response, the model of the world, and all that's going to become more available to the
Yeah.
perception.
Yeah. And so it also, when you were talking about distortions and what is behind the distortion,
Correct.
and that's what you want to get to or help your clients,
Mhm.
uncover as a coach.
Correct.
And what normally is at the root of this cognitive distortion or these
Again,
cognitive distortions? I wonder if there is one root.
well, it is the learning mechanism, and often we love the culture, right? The culture is a wonderful thing that comes with a whole bunch of cognitive distortions.
Yeah.
Right? So our upbringing, in the culture, when I'm talking about, I'm not only talking about our heritage, but also we can be part of an organizational culture. We
Mhm.
can be part of a culture of a particular country that is not necessarily part of our heritage. We can be part of a sports team culture, right? There are different cultural, the belonging, how that the belonging conforms our reality in a way. So the way then everyone else learns impacts the way we construct our model of the world, and sometimes that the confirmation requirements to belong can bend our reality, right? In order to be corporate, you have to be like that, you have to talk like that, you have to do this, otherwise you can't be here. Then what is going to happen? The person is going to think, oh, well, if I'm not saying that, I'll be fired. So we got to go into that, wherever that is, and check in if that's true or not.
Yeah, and that takes, I think, time and courage.
Yes.
And it's kind of, the breaking free a little bit of, we have our need to belong, and we've talked about this before, and our need for authenticity and to be ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious, cognitive distortions aren't usually taught in coaching programs. I mean, at least from what I know. So I'm curious what made you start, implementing them in your own coaching and mentor coaching, and what's been the result?
Well, the result is transcendence, right? Sustainable, organically sustainable progress instead of a band-aid, right? That what I see often, I'm actually starting from the later part of your question. I'll go back to that. When we honor the existing structure and coach around it, that's the transactional coaching, because it's not challenging how the person perceiving their reality. I just did an assessment for PCC submission. The client already was recognizing and expressing that they wanted to, they had written a book. It was sitting in somewhere because they became mother of two. So they wanted to develop something so they can actually start reinvesting into those books and sell them, right? And but as they were explaining, they recognized, oh, it is not about the action. I am now recognizing that I put other people's needs ahead of me. But coach completely disregarded what the client said. Not completely disregarded. What I'm saying is disregarded this recognition. And it went back into, okay, so what kind of action do we need to develop? You can develop an action, but as long as this person feels somewhere in their cognitive reality that they cannot be on their priority list, that band-aid solution cannot be sustained.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where then if we want to overhaul somebody's life with them, we need to get into that, because today it's about the book, tomorrow it's going to be their diet, and another day it's going to be their fitness program, whatever it is, it's going to show up everywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then when we start to challenge the perceptual reality model of the world, then we get into transformation, more so into transcendence, into new reality. And that problem doesn't exist anymore. So that is the reason why, as a meditation teacher and a coach, and then, people ask, how did they come together? Everything comes together. As a Lean Six Sigma expert, I go into simple, elegant solutions that can be sustained. So therefore, I combine different techniques to develop this in the way I teach cognitive distortions. And the reason I picked this as a very important thing, because I wanted to help people to have sustainable results that are organic to them. Yes, the coaching supposed to help the clients to find organic results, but in my experience, I see transactional coaching isn't always very organic to the client. The coach
Yeah.
is like, what are you going to do? What time you're going to do it? I mean, who needs to pay you to figure that out? Anybody who books with a coach, they know how to schedule themselves. There smart devices that can schedule it, right? What gets in the way of that scheduling? What gets in the way of committing? I was listening another submission, and this was for an MCC submission, and the coach felt it, that whatever the solution they came up with isn't going to be sustainable. The coach was feeling, but they were kept asking about accountability question instead of getting the root of what is it that, right, they are sensing is going to get in the way of clients' commitment. And so, yeah, that's why that I decided that this is a super significant thing
Yeah.
in the field of change, that becoming aware. And that's why I was using that my language in the beginning, not mindfulness, but mind awareness. Becoming aware of how one's reality function is a super significant thing in this field.
Yeah. And I love how you say simple, elegant solutions. It's it just feels so well formed and just so wonderful. And thank you for offering those examples of, the coaching sessions that you listen to. And I've been on the side, as, a practice client, being coached. And when someone is trying to coach me in a very transactional way, it can feel frustrating, because it feels as a client, you don't feel seen at all. It feels like, oh, it doesn't matter what you're feeling or what your needs are. We have to get you over here to be meeting your goal and to be whatever it might be, exercising 5 days a week, or to be, drinking your smoothies every day, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But it feels like something they haven't seen you.
Absolutely. And this is where some of the shortfalls is I see the coach education, right? They teach the students often transactional coaching methods with a certain formulary structure. And then they basically ask the coaches to make sure there is an accountability and so on. And then they teach the coaches to establish a rapport. Well, if you're listening to somebody deeply, that's already the rapport building. You don't need to build a rapport by asking somebody what did they do on a weekend and then leave that content and go back into, okay, we have 20 minutes. So that's not the way to build a rapport. And so that there are those dysfunctionalities I see in some coach trainings that occurs. Then there is this superficial listening, superficial responding, and then superficially wanting to build a rapport. If one really deeply listens to you and reflects you, then you're going to feel like, oh, I'm being seen and heard. Then you're going to start trusting this person.
Yeah.
In the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting how it sounds like it's very cultural to be like, oh, let's chit chat, let's do some small talk. That's building rapport, showing interest. What did you do over the weekend? But that doesn't build, it sounds like the trust and that deep sense of I feel seen and I feel heard.
Correct. And as you said it, the frustration, right? Once you receive that level of receiving, Then you get frustrated, and I say that I'm a feisty client because I don't want somebody asking me unnecessary stuff, right?
Mhm.
I want to just get in and feel heard and understood and challenged my
Yeah.
realities that in a way that I can't do it myself.
That's really interesting because a lot of people, I think, don't want to feel as challenged, at least, but there is a need to feel heard before,
Yeah,
you can invite someone to challenge you, I
yeah,
would think.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So cognitive distortions, from what I know, is usually used in therapy. So how can coaches use this approach and stay in their scope of practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the standardized way that is often used in therapy, right? That it's called ABCs for
Mhm.
the CBT, and what is the activating event? What are the beliefs about that? And what are the consequences as a result of that? That's the gist of the therapy approach.
Mhm.
But you can take that and apply in coaching as long as that you're not being it's just any other, just like any other tools and evidence-based methods that we transferred into coaching, such as
Mhm.
motivational interviewing, appreciative inquiries, and so on, right? So as long as that the coaches are staying as the equal partner with the client and inquiring in a way that's not going to violate their boundaries and so on. So we can certainly apply like any other
Mhm.
tool. Yeah,
Okay. Okay. And I think that's important to know for coaches, to feel comfortable, using, cognitive distortions in their practice.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit. I was wondering if there was anything you would like to add. How do you help your clients create awareness around cognitive distortions they might be experiencing? So if you could give me, an example here, that would be really wonderful as well.
Absolutely. And that's where I developed my methodology that the linguistic cues are indications, right? When somebody says, oh, well, like this example that I gave on my the conversation that I assessed for PCC
Mhm.
submission, right? The client says, I need to put other people, I need to meet other people's needs before I can meet mine. Now, that's an assumption. That's yes, one can say, well, when you are a mother of 2 years old baby, you
Mhm.
need to do that at certain level,
Yeah.
right? But does that also mean that you need to surrender your every need? And is there an only one way to meet the needs of the 2-year-old baby?
Mhm.
Because then the client was also talking about, oh, maybe they can ask when the coach wanted to do a transactional coaching, obviously the
Mhm.
action thing came about how the maybe client can ask spousal help, their husband's help over the weekend, and then the client say, oh, but they are busy and they're this important. You're gonna see that,
Yeah.
right? And then the coach was like, okay. And then first the client said, oh, I can maybe do this over an hour over the weekend. And then they go back to 30 minutes already. And
Mhm.
so then the challenging thing is what I'm hearing here is that there is an idea about everybody else's needs need to come before yours. And you can use that flight example, right? Putting everybody else's mask, what does that do for
Mhm.
you? Just to start recognition
Mhm.
first.
Yeah.
And then get the response. And when they get that response, they are going to see the response. Again, the frontal conscious cognition is going to say, of course, that needs to be like this. But then the back says, oh, no, there is no way. We can't do that. It's not all right.
Yeah.
It's not possible, right? And then we start to negotiate between these two levels of consciousness. That what does the subtle consciousness, unconscious, subconscious need in order to feel safe enough to give the self a permission to do something other than what the person has been doing.
Mhm.
And that's where my unique approach come in, because as I teach the cognitive distortions and linguistic patterns, and then I coach the people about polyvagal approach beyond polyvagal theory, how the nervous system is responding, what are the nervous reactive responses, and how the coaches can have a dialogue around those too. So that's the way to start engaging the client.
Mhm. Yeah, and I really like how you started us off giving the example of using a metaphor with clients. And I feel like that's really helpful. And you bring in a lot of metaphor in your coaching. So it does feel kind of like a very safe first step into, okay, let's see what's going on for me and understanding it through an external example, you know?
Yeah, the metaphors are very powerful tools in the cognitive reality, perceptual
Mhm.
reality, because it gives you a whole image, the picture. That's how the mind stores information.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Mhm.
using our own, but especially if the client is offering you their metaphors, using theirs will be very powerful.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so just quickly about metaphors, because I've, been in maybe in coaching situations where maybe I offer a metaphor, but the coach uses their metaphor instead.
Mhm.
So it sounds like, yes, always kind of choosing the client's metaphor.
Absolutely, because what happens then, it's in the sensations, information, additional data gets lost in the translation.
Mhm.
So if the client is not offering, the coach can offer theirs, or to refine the clients, they can present something and see.
Mm.
I heard yours and it seems like this. How does that resonate? And if the client buys in and then they can go with the coaches. I do that sometimes, because
Mhm.
when I see that the client's metaphor is going to keep them more locked in that perception
Ah,
reality, then I
yes.
offer something else,
Mhm.
but not necessarily translating them into something else.
Mhm.
That offering a modified version that may provide more freedom in the
Mhm.
choice making. So one can do that with careful understanding,
Yeah.
but and still first connecting the client through their metaphors, and then possibly altering if needed, otherwise just stay with theirs.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that. So we've talked about how to help our clients create awareness around cognitive distortions, and a little bit about, how we help them challenge these cognitive distortions. Could you tell us more about how we can help them challenge? Like we're helping them see it. And now, how do we help them challenge?
I think we can continue on that example which I've given you, right? When you say to the client, okay, so what do you think about the airplanes
Mhm.
that you need to put your mask on and so on? And they're going to say, yeah, I do have that tendency to put mine on, but I can understand that. So then we could say, then how, when you recognize that, what happens to the idea that that's again, the cognitive distortive language, always have to put somebody else's needs ahead of me. So
Mhm.
then when that always is no longer valid in your life, now I'm already challenging,
Mhm.
looking for exceptions. So then the psyche is going to say, oh, well, yeah, maybe then if I am in a hospital bed, then I cannot put somebody else's need ahead of me. All right, so that's an exception. We found one, right? Then it's going to be categorized differently in the mind structure, the model of the world. And then we can say, what others things? This is just one way I'm giving
Yeah.
you right now. There are many ways to do it, but so we can look at the, depending on the what the cognition is and what the distorted reality looks like, we can find different ways. This was an exception because it was about always all or nothing thing.
Mhm.
And so basically we need to understand how that distorted mirrors are for the client. Then we can craft the challenge question based on that.
Yeah.
If the mirror is showing you so thin and long, we need to challenge that. If the mirror is showing you like a cricket, we need to challenge that, right? There is no one way,
Mhm.
but as always, listening is the coach's most important tool. And based on that, we can devise a strategy for
Yeah.
change.
And you said crafting the challenging, a challenging question. And it really is a craft, it's an art
Correct.
to be able to really listen and know like how to craft a question that's going to be helpful, that's going to help. And I know you use the analogy of a knot. I don't know if the knot, in this
Mhm.
case, that analogy or that metaphor would apply. Sometimes, clients are holding on so tightly to their beliefs that it's really hard to loosen the knot. No matter where, which direction, you head and how you craft your questions, I think that there's need for safety that they possibly might have is just too strong in it. There's no loosening the knot.
Absolutely. And this is why I developed my unique approach that I teach in
Mhm.
my neurologic approach to coaching, which is called Genco method reconstructive inquiry.
Mhm.
In that method, basically, people often say to me, oh, give us questions, give us questions. I don't like giving questions because you
Yeah.
got to come up with yours based on what you're hearing. But I gave them methods to get to where I am or where the master is and where they can become masterful coaches. So in my methodology, first, what I do is to resolve the identification. There is
Mhm.
often, whatever the distorted belief is, if one perceives the self as that.
Mhm.
So we need to create a space between whatever the person is believing and what the self is. That's what I call resolve identification. And then that there is often the value system, whether it's learned value or
Mhm.
current value, or that the value needs to be upgraded. There is an attachment to the belief because of the values. Is, for example, if the person says, I always have to put my needs behind everybody else's, the value is maybe the love or connection. And their
Mhm.
belief is about, oh, this is the only way I can connect.
Yeah.
So we need to figure this out. And then the next is redefine meaning making, such as I just explained, right? If the value is about connection, then the meaning making is that I don't need to be a doormat
Mhm.
to connect, because that's not an authentic connection anyway.
Yeah.
And then we need to rebuild compassion either towards the self or another human being.
Mhm.
Here in this case, we need to build a compassion towards the client self, because there is no compassion for the self needs and self existence, right? And then that reorganizes the self, because the client's model of the world is changing. And therefore, the self then becomes a new version of the self.
Mhm.
New interpretation of the values, new responses. So, and then the coach needs to have a dialogue, how they how they are now going to respond to the world around them with these new upgraded versions of the belief and the model of the world. So that's my methodology called Genco method, reconstructive inquiry.
Yeah, and I love the upgrade. Yeah. So this is something that you teach in what would be, for example, let's say someone wants to learn more, and
Absolutely.
really have that one-on-one, support and connection with you in learning more about cognitive distortions. Where would you recommend that they head? What would be kind of the first step?
So it's certainly individual mentor sessions are available, but I do teach these courses, neurologic approach to coaching, my methodologies once a year. That's all my schedule allows, and it's gonna get more sparse as it goes. So this year, the first part of the cognitive neurologic approach to coach training starts with the looking at the neuro-linguistic patterning and cognitive distortions, and it starts May 31st. So they can actually go to gencocoaching.com, upcoming events, and or subscribe to the website to be informed about upcoming events. And this year, it's listed and there is time to register.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And are there any other upcoming events that you would like to share?
Absolutely. I mean, there is the mm, philosophical concepts towards the coaching with mastery is already started in the beginning of the year, but we're still accepting people if they wish to participate. These are deeply philosophical life concepts that get in a way, how the model of the world is
Mhm.
structured. And when somebody wants to, whether they are beginning coaches or intermediary coaches or advanced coaches, they all welcome, because we're talking about these concepts in a deeper level. That's helpful for coaches' understanding to be able to establish these upgradable connections
Mhm.
and associations with the client. So that's also listed in the upcoming events. I haven't updated my new the second quarter mentor sessions yet,
Mhm.
but there is an energetic approach to coach training is going to start end of March. So that's also helpful understanding, recognizing energetic tendencies, energetic patterns, and being able to have a language to challenge the clients, asking questions towards the transformative coaching conversations. That's quite important. And that could be applied anywhere in a boardroom or a life coaching
Mm.
scenarios or health and wellness coaching scenarios. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It sounds like there is a lot going on in your coaching world, as always. I love it. And thank you so much for sharing. And this has been a wonderful discussion. Very,
Thank
enriching, learning more about cognitive distortions and your unique approach.
Thank you so much, Marta, for your always, as always, thoughtful questions, partnerships. Anything you wish to share with our audience for you?
No, right now I'm just kind of working on the same things, maybe thinking about putting together a group program, but it's something that's very, 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 it's in its beginning stages. So more to come next time.
Sounds good. And thank you, everybody, for you tuned in. You've been listening to Genco Coaching with Mastery and Elegance. It's with Tijen Genco. It's an original podcast that is offered through Genco Coaching. And if you liked what you heard in this episode, consider subscribing to us wherever you found us. And we also appreciate feedback giving if you're finding in your heart to do so. And if you are looking for more resources about the coaching, what you heard, you can find them at gencocoaching.com, or additional resources are published in amazon.com. Thank you for being with us. take very good care for now. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you, Tijen.